Welcome back into the Lions247 Podcast. Game week number 4 has arrived here in Happy Valley. I am Tyler Donohue. In just a matter of moments, we'll bring on our colleagues from Lions247.com, Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen, who were both down in Jordan-Hare Stadium. Hopefully you caught our post-game podcast on Saturday night with Daniel, who was still down at that stadium. A good commentary toward the end of that discussion about what exactly it looked like from Penn State's perspective for that post-game celebration. We're going to get into a little bit more of that before we close the book on this Auburn matchup, talk about some standouts, some storylines coming out of this one before setting the stage a little bit later in the week for Central Michigan coming to town for a noon kickoff this Saturday. Penn State finishing out its non-conference play, but of course, this was the matchup on the non-conference schedule. Since we last spoke to you, Nick Singleton was named the Big Ten Freshman of the Week once again, second consecutive week that happened. 24/7 Sports also named Nick Singleton its true Freshman of the Week after he went for 129 yards, 2 touchdowns on 10 carries at Auburn. Jair Brown, Penn State safety, named Big Ten Defensive Player of the Week after filling the stat sheet and being a key part of a strong Nittany Lions defensive effort against the Tigers. And oh, by the way, Penn State surging up in national rankings, up from 22 to 14 now in the AP poll, and also in the coaches poll from 23 to 15. We'll talk about the pathway that may be set up for Penn State here moving toward October. But first, let's bring on Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen, as promised, to review a little bit of what we saw from one of Penn State's most emphatic wins that I've witnessed, at least from the program in my 5 seasons here. And Mark, we'll begin with you because we got a long conversation in Saturday night with Daniel before you guys exited the stadium. Brennan Cam was up on Sunday morning, I think, and everybody got a chance to check out your view of that post-game celebration at Auburn. But what did it look like behind the lens as you were down there on the field in Jordan-Hare?
Well, first of all, appreciate everybody who stayed up for the podcast. Daniel and I were the last 2 Penn State writers out of the press box and then made the hour-and-a-half drive to Atlanta. But what a great game to cover. You can't do too much coverage. And the Brennan Cam, the cool thing about that was it's been a while since we've been able to do one of those after a pretty cool Penn State win out at Purdue. We were not allowed down on the field. And, we have to play by the rules of the facility, so there's really nothing you can do. But if you watch the Brennan Cam, I want to apologize to people if I made you seasick or early on when I went out there for the handshake, I was looking for something interesting going on, and it was like the most it was somber is not the right word, but it was just there was like no enthusiasm because the game was such a blowout, and guys were just basically, hey, good luck number 1, and good luck the rest of the way. So I'm like going around like this. And again, I apologize, people. I was looking for something interesting to happen. And then you hear the blue band, which was there, fire up. And then you see the emotion in the eyes lighting up for the Penn State players and coaches as they made their way over there. So I left that beginning part in just to show the kind of juxtaposition of, oh, well, yeah, business-like win at an SEC opponent at a place people were wondering if Penn State would be able to handle the Jordan-Hare atmosphere. Ho-hum, won the game. Now let's go celebrate. And that was the cool part when I was able to get down there, when they're singing the alma mater, when Sean Clifford let out a primal scream, when James Franklin is high-fiving all the fans and then went down the one whole sideline to see even more fans. And I know you guys talked about it on the post-game podcast, but what a turnout of Penn State fans. I mean, that was impressive. And you know what? I feel good for the people who went because it's been a tough couple years for Penn State fans. And to make that trip, you don't know how that game's going to turn out. And to see their team play the way it did and then to be able to come down and celebrate with them, that was a pretty cool thing. So hopefully I was able to get a little bit of that across. But again, apologies for anybody who got seasick early in that. That was my fault. I'll smooth it out for future Brennan Cams.
I'd encourage folks out there before you start to get hyped up for game number 4 on Penn State's schedule, go back, check that out. That video is up on Lions247.com, several minutes, and you're going to see a lot of familiar faces, players, coaches, administrators. And I would encourage folks, listen closely. You hear some things in the field that people are talking that they're not on the record. It's a little bit different than what we normally bring you in terms of coaches and players on video. So I'm just going to put that out there as well. And Daniel, I mentioned this, and you wrote it up on Sunday. Penn State's on the move. We knew that would be the case. When you go down and you win by 29 points, I don't care how Auburn is this year, you're going to be on the rise. And Penn State was number 22 in the AP poll coming into this matchup. They leave it at number 14 and number 15 now in the coaches poll. And it certainly seems like James Franklin, I don't necessarily think he viewed it as a terrible thing to be unranked, at least in terms of motivation for his program. I'm sure he would like the number next to his program's name, especially for national perception purposes, every day of every year. But they've gone from that unranked moment where it was very much prove it. And now they're coming out of that 3-game stretch where everyone said, can they get out of their 2-1? They got out of their 3-0, and now they're within striking distance of the top 10. And they have a path set up, fellas, where they have this matchup at home against Central Michigan, matchup against Northwestern here in Beaver Stadium. Northwestern has not looked great by any means this year, and then a bye week. And then you go to Michigan. Right now, this obliterates everything James Franklin wants to maintain from a 1-0 perspective. But right now, that path is certainly there for a top 10 showdown in Ann Arbor on October 15th.
Things set up really nicely for them. I think when I was pre-writing that AP poll and coaches poll piece, in my head, I was thinking, all right, this is probably in the 16, 17, 18 range. Definitely gets them into the top 20. I thought that some people might, from a national perspective, might discount Auburn a little bit, given what we've known about that program over the past couple of months. But top 15 after 3 games, starting from unranked, that's a pretty big rise. And I think that they've looked like a top 15 team. They went into Jordan-Hare Stadium, which even against an Auburn team that seemed a little disjointed, it's still, you have to beat bad teams. And if you beat them handily, then that's to your credit, because that's how you should look. So I think that they've, in terms of that prove it mindset, I think they've proved a couple things through these first 3 weeks. And I think they're being rewarded in some of the perception nationally. You wanted to see the running game, you wanted to see the offensive line, and you just kind of wanted to see this Manny Diaz defense also show up and force turnovers. And I think you saw everything you wanted to see. So I was a little surprised they got all the way up to 14, but it really does set up nicely for, if they take care of business against Central Michigan and Northwestern, which lost to an FCS team over the weekend, a good one, but an FCS team nonetheless at home. It is shaping up really nicely, depending on what happens ahead of them, to be in that top 10 range coming out of the bye week in 3 or 4 weeks. So it's things look a lot different. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit later about some of our perceptions. But number 14 Penn State, 3-0. That's not how some of us, I think, drew it up after 3 weeks, but we're here.
Hey, don't be telling people that you pre-write stuff. What are you doing? Let them think that you crank out 800 words to 16 seconds after the announcement is made. So seriously, on the rankings, isn't it funny how in the preseason people are like, oh, I can't believe they're ranked. Like, people make a deal out of it in the preseason. And when you're in the Big Ten, it doesn't matter, because if you take care of business, you're gonna climb up the rankings. And when you have a schedule the way Penn State's schedule is played out, and I haven't checked this, I haven't had time to, but I mean, does anybody else in the country have 2 road wins over Power 5 teams at 3 games into the season? I mean, that's incredible. But so people don't even worry about the preseason rankings. I mean, you could check them out; they're fun for comparison's sake. But when you're Penn State, you are going to have the opportunity to prove yourself as the season goes along. And we've seen it. I mean, here they are 3 weeks in at number 14, which I don't think any of us envisioned.
I think,
by the way,
Pat, I was going to say, I think Pat Forty over at Sports Illustrated did have today that Penn State is the only team with 2 road wins over Power 5 teams. And a little interesting nugget, I guess weekly, he does his own little mini playoff selection, and based on the resumes of teams at the time, and Penn State was in there as the 3 seed. So that's interesting in terms of national perception. But we got nine more games, 10 more weeks.
No way. We're talking national championship already. Daniel and I were saying now that the game, the Penn State basketball game at the Palestra, the second week of January, we could be in trouble, because we're probably going to be covering playoffs at that point. I'm kidding, people. There's a long way to go.
Let me wrangle in these guests real quick and remind them that number 3 Ohio State and number 4 Michigan on the schedule in October. To your point, if you want to prove it, the stepping stones are there every year for Penn State. They're not always set up to succeed and prove it, but this year, I think the one thing, and we'll get to this with our mailbag question a little bit later, which asks us to kind of reevaluate our preseason predictions through the 3 games. But I think the thing that you look at here is the Purdue probably thought that was going to be some kind of dramatic outcome, and I think the betting line reflected that, and our predictions for the most part reflected that. I thought going to Auburn there was a little bit of a mixed bag nationally. A lot of people just felt like Auburn was going to find a way to hold home field and come away with the win and rely on some maybe intangibles to get away with the win against Penn State. But when I was forecasting this one, it just felt like this was the superior team in the matchup. And I think for Penn State to set all the other stuff aside when they went down to SEC territory and not just bully and put away Auburn, but to prevent Auburn from piling up some garbage time points to make the scoreboard look even more respectable. There's just no way, unless you try really hard, that you come out of this game and you can sneeze at what Penn State accomplished at Auburn. I don't care if you think Auburn is going to win 5 or 6 games the rest of the way this season and end up being a team that fires their coach and misses a bowl game. What Penn State did in the vacuum of that Saturday, you got to give all the credit in the world to James Franklin and the fans that traveled there got a reward for it. And now Penn State comes back home, and it certainly seems like they have earned this rise in the top 25, whereas a lot of teams, they kind of work their way up because the people in front of them are falling by the wayside.
Yeah, I think a lot of national people, and I think a lot of the Auburn writers put way too much stock in the home field advantage there. Let me be straight. That is a great place. I mean, the campus is beautiful. The fans are tremendous, like almost painfully friendly. Really behind their team. And I thought there were times in that game when they did cause some offensive penalties for Penn State. But I got news for you, man. This Penn State team has played at Iowa. It's played at Ohio State. I don't even put Michigan in there because I don't think that's that great of an atmosphere. I just don't. I mean, I think Wisconsin's actually a better atmosphere. This is a Penn State team, and every team in the Big Ten has been on the road in hostile environments. When you're at Iowa, you're not getting polite fans, man. You're getting people coming after you during the game, sitting 15 feet away from you. And Daniel brought up a good point that Jordan Hare, that there's the hedges in there. The fans are like really far away. So I think there was a little bit too much put on that. Having said that, you went at an SEC team that's won a national championship in the last decade or so. That is a legitimate win. That's a very good program. You could definitely hang your hat. That's why not everybody's playing those games. That's why James Franklin doesn't want to play those games moving forward because, yeah, it's great if you win it, but that's not a given. So to go down there, I do think it's good for the resume.
And let's face it, when it gets to November, December, and if Penn State's in that conversation where everybody's pulling out the resumes and doing the blind tests, that 29-point win, I don't care how Auburn goes the rest of the way, that was an emphatic victory. And I think Auburn's going to play some of the other college football playoff contenders a bit closer as the season goes on. So that'll be an interesting kind of, if it comes down to it and you're looking for little tiny nuances that can separate one team from the other, especially before we get into playoff expansion. And now here I am talking about playoffs. Thanks, guys. But Penn State, I don't care how Auburn fares moving forward, just be able to point to that score and say, look, we went down there, we handled business, and we came home with a huge win. There's just really not anything people can do, I think, to put any kind of damper on what Penn State was able to accomplish.
Yeah, and kicked a field goal late in the game when they could have probably punched in another touchdown. When you talk about those resumes, I thought Penn State did the classy thing there. They could have punched in another TD and didn't do it when, down the line, I think a lot of teams in that position are not going to kick that field goal. I think they're going to punch in another TD to make the score even more lopsided.
I think no matter what happens down the stretch, this win will age fine for Penn State. If Auburn finds its footing and has a respectable season, then you went down and you kicked in the teeth of a bowl team. If Auburn fully bottoms out, then you went down there and you did what you were supposed to do and blew out a bad team. So I think that Penn State is in good shape with this moving forward. It will be interesting. I think when you talk about Big Ten SEC comparisons to see how some of those other, CFP contenders stack up against Auburn. In the past, it seems like the committee has really weighed those, common opponents and things like that when it comes to the rankings. So I think that this will be a game that no matter what Auburn does, we're going to be talking about this, I think, a lot come late October and November once these rankings start and once, I think things kind of start to settle in.
Yeah, and if you're a Penn State fan now, you better be an Auburn fan the rest of the way. Seriously, that's the way it works. And you look at who Auburn plays: LSU, Georgia, Arkansas, and then I think there's a game at the end of the season. They play some team in the Iron Bowl. I forget who it is, but it's you just go right down there. A&M. I mean, right now, if you're a Penn State fan, you're rooting for Auburn in every one of those games because every game that Auburn plays well reflects positively on Penn State.
Brian Harsin, I'm sure, appreciates the support at this point from Penn State fans.
They're the only ones.
One thing that we kept coming back to on the postgame podcast, and I know Daniel wrote a story off this on Saturday night, is the physicality that Penn State displayed. We've talked so much about team speed and how that's going to be an issue for a lot of Big Ten opponents this year as we forecast what Penn State can accomplish. But I think you made 2, 3, 4 shout outs toward this offensive line on our pregame podcast last Thursday in terms of, hey, this is the litmus test, and you're going to be judged off of it. What say you now?
Yeah, good for them. They proved it. And you know what the funny thing was? It's like after the game, nobody even made a big deal of it. And that's what happens.
Classic offensive line.
That's what the offensive line. That's how it works. Everybody's saying how great Singleton is and what a great job Clifford did in the receivers. And what a tremendous block by Theo Johnson, which it was a tremendous block. But that if you're Phil Troutwine and you're those offensive linemen, you don't care. The proof is in 250 rushing, 250 passing. When you have an offensive line, it's right in there. I forget what the exact numbers are, but when you have an offensive line that allows you to have that sort of balance, they got the job done. Give them all the credit. Now let's see you start stacking up games like this. Let's see you start putting game after game. No sacks in that game. I don't think there were any QB hurries. What a great job that offensive line did. And listen, I get it. I agree that Nick Singleton, and we talked about this in the preseason, that an explosive back can make an offensive line look better. But I got news for you. Nick Singleton had 10 carries in that game, and he was tremendous. He was phenomenal when he was in there. But he had 4 carries for 10 yards in the first half. So that wasn't all Nick Singleton. That offensive line was out there every single snap. Obviously, you can't play without an offensive line. Over on defense, they may go with an entire secondary, 11 defensive backs at some point. But that offensive line did a great job, flying under the radar a little bit, which is where offensive lines want to be. Then now start stacking those games up. These next 2 games, it's going to be important to follow that up and just play better and better heading into the meat of the schedule.
Singleton averaged 12.4 yards per carry, but Kaytron Allen, 9 carries, averaging almost 6 yards on each of those. Devin Ford, 7 carries, averaged more than 5 yards on those. Kevon Lee, 4 carries, averaged 4.5 yards. So it was a group effort. And to your point, it is very classic of the offensive line and of a kicker, Jake Pinniger. I didn't hear a lot of people talking about him coming out of this one. A lot of people were discussing him coming out of that Ohio matchup. We gave Jake Pinniger a tip of the cap on our post-game podcast. Hit a couple field goals. One was from 48, handled all of his extra points. Certainly handled himself well in a week where people were wondering if he might lose his grip entirely on that job. And let's go to the quarterback who we said is the guy you want facing a situation like what they experienced in Jordan Hare. Daniel, we discussed it quite a bit, but coming out of this now, we got a 3-game assessment of who Sean Clifford is in 2022. You've also got a nice peek or 2 or 3 at Drew Aller and what he might be for you. But quickly going through Sean Clifford's stats during the 3-0 start, he's at 64% completion percentage. That's 3 points higher than at any other season of his starting career for Penn State. He's got 8 total touchdowns, 5 of those through the air, 3 on the ground, and only 1 turnover, which we all know was a huge, huge mistake, but he swiftly avenged that. There was another late drive in the first half that was able to put Penn State, give them some cushion going into halftime. I thought really did some things in terms of the mindset of both of these programs coming out of intermission. What do we think about number 14 so far?
I feel really good about what we've seen from Sean Clifford. I think that we've said this a bunch of times where this is his 6th year, his 4th year as a starter. we kind of know what his ceiling is. We know what it looks like when everything is going well. And I think that, I don't want to damn him with faint praise or anything, but the fact that he's not really someone that we're talking about a ton coming out of this game is, I think, really good. I think that that's kind of what you want to see. 14 of 19 for 178 yards. I talked about it Saturday night. The mistakes weren't really anything that he did. There weren't any gasps in the press box as he, threw the ball over the middle or, threw the ball into traffic. I felt like a couple of his misses were deep where no one could get to the ball. And then some of the other incompletions, he missed Parker Washington twice wide open. Who knows what the progressions on those plays technically are, especially the one where Parker was out in the left flat. I think that was a little bit more of a diversion. So I think that he's just commanding the offense very well. That he has a handle. I mean, it's year 2 under Mike Yurcich. I think that he kind of showed on Saturday what that looks like when it's clicking. Obviously, you can't discount the benefit of having a running game where even when Devin Ford, when Katron Allen, when Kevon Lee are all averaging 4.5 yards per carry or better, that obviously makes his job a lot easier. So I feel good about what we've seen out of Sean Clifford. Obviously, it's high variance, and you're still holding your breath for when the other shoe might drop. But I think the fact that the past 2 games there hasn't been much of that, I think that bodes well. And then for all the talk about the middle 8, the fact that when it's been crunch time, even in the first half when it's a little bit less pressure of crunch time, but in the flow of a game, it's still crunch time. The fact that he's shown up then, I think bodes really, really well moving forward.
Yeah, I wrote Tyler. I'm sorry, Tyler. I wrote that when he took that hit from Papo in the first quarter, the entire stadium was like, whoa. They were like, people were jacked, and Auburn was jacked. And he popped up, brushed it off. Okay, let's quarterback sneak on the next play. You know what I mean? Or whenever it was. I mean, it's like that was, I think that sent a message loud and clear that Penn State was in this for a fist fight. When you go back to the whole physical thing, when your quarterback shakes that off. And then the other thing that it didn't occur to me until yesterday, flying back, you have a chance to kind of look over some things and think about it. They still ran him after that. I mean, that speaks to the confidence they have in QB2 and the fact that, you don't want to put Clifford in danger. But I mean, he had a rushing touchdown after that. He did put himself in danger. And I think knowing that you have a more capable number 2 at this point is just huge, because I think you could let Clifford play his game and take an occasional chance and not worry that if he gets banged up, there's going to be a gigantic drop off when Aller comes in.
And for the first time in a long time, for the first time in the majority of Sean Clifford's career, it feels like he may have that ground game that I've said it before. Sean Clifford, I think, can be a very good quarterback. I think he's shown stretches of very good quarterback play with the Nittany Lions. There have been valleys, though, along the way. And because of that, when you're relying upon Sean Clifford leading you to victories and leading your offense and being that primary source and throwing it up to Jahan Dotson and trying to get downfield with his guys, it's just been a severely, severely lacking aspect of this offense with Sean Clifford as the quarterback. There's been multiple offensive coordinators. We talked about the offensive line play and how that is tied into it. But, Daniel, I don't think there's any way you can really match up last year's Sereno to start to this year's Sereno start, aside that you got to that third win against Auburn, because stylistically, it has been such a different process the last couple of weeks. They didn't have that Villanova game where they bottomed out in the run game. And then against Auburn, they didn't have to escape and they didn't have to rely upon Sean Clifford to get it done. It was Sean Clifford staying the course and Nick Singleton scooting and Katron Allen helping to put the game away. It feels different. And I know people are trying to draw those parallels, but maybe don't, Penn State fans. Maybe don't make yourself go there.
I think Penn State blew up all those parallels on Saturday, because those first 2 weeks, the script was pretty similar in terms of close win in week 1, and then in week 2, taking care of business against a MAC team, even though I think the Ohio win was probably a lot more impressive than that Ball State win. Obviously, Central Michigan this weekend presents a couple challenges based on what their quarterback has done this year and what their running back has done in the past, even though that hasn't really carried over into this year because of some losses up front on the line. But I mean, Penn State is in good shape, and I think they really busted the comparisons from last year with how they beat Auburn. It wasn't an escape. It was comfortable. It was, they made it look easy in the second half. Whereas last year it was just such a fist fight the whole way through. And the feeling at the end was, I think, a lot of relief that they survived that. I mean, Bo Nix had the ball late in that game and before Jaquan Brisker sealed it. So I think that the fact that Penn State didn't really even need to escape Jordan-Hare Stadium bodes well for, having a signature win early and showing that things are different from last year. I think that's pretty big. I think a lot of people will probably be wary of something because this fan base, and we know how quickly you can fall back to earth from being 5-0 and ranked in the top 5 nationally. But things are shaping up nicely. I think that they've really, really established that this is a different team from last year. And so we'll see how that carries over with these next 2 games, which should be on paper, should be games where you take care of business into that bye week.
We talked about on the post-game podcast, Brenton Strange had himself a nice game as a blocker, as a receiver, certainly rounding into form at the tight end spot. And the offensive line probably can go back there and go through all of those guys. I thought Landon Tengwall took a step forward for his career. Olu Fashanu took some lumps, as you would expect, going onto the road against an SEC opponent with different level defensive ends. But I think ultimately he'll be better for this. And I think by the end of the game, he was winning far more battles than he lost on the day. So really another sign of progress for Olu Fashanu. And Drew Scruggs, I mean, Mark, you've been pointing to him for a couple months now as being the guy who is going to take that next step for Penn State. He's there physically, certainly seems to be there mentally right now and the way he's approaching the game. And I just think you go across the board right now. But the body language to me and the swagger of this team, I'm actually going to go over to the defensive side of the football because I felt like they were the tone setters. And that was an important part of this game. And not just trying to take the crowd out of it, but trying to take the soul and the heart out of your opponent a little bit. It felt like whichever team was able to get to that point first was going to be in a really good spot. And I felt like because of the way they approached this matchup, because of the way they fired off at TJ Finley, who was ripe for picking, as I thought he might be as this game progressed. Manny Diaz, Mark, we've been waiting to see what it might look like. 4 turnovers, defensive player of the week in the Big Ten with Jair Brown. What are your thoughts on what we saw from this defense?
Well, I mean, the stuff that they can do with their defensive backs, because you have guys like Jair Brown, is, it's unbelievable. I mean, where we were, it wasn't a typical press box area. It was down in the one corner. And on the Brisker, the Brown, we all done that? I know I've done it way too often, the Lackawanna connection. But on the Brown blitz where he caused the fumble, we could see it coming. You could see it. He was up there, and we didn't know how he was going to go, but he kind of looped around. And I just think when you have weapons like that, I mean, that's just something else. And then for the pass rush to finally get home in various different ways, that's what I thought was fun. I mean, you had Curtis Jacobs, you had Adisa Isaac as a linebacker getting his first sack in 2 years, or as a defensive end getting his first sack. Since the injury, you had defensive backs getting in there, coming from all different angles. And I think, I forget if it was you, Tyler, or if it was you, Daniel, said prior to the game last week that would not be surprised to see if Manny Diaz still has some tricks in the bag that he hasn't shown. Yeah, and sure enough, he did. I mean, he just seems like he's much more aggressive than Pry was. And I like Brent Pry, wish him nothing but the best. But coming from different places, and it just seems a lot more complicated for offenses to figure out. I think they continue to put stuff on tape that's going to be difficult for teams to figure out. But I do think it all goes back to when you have that many versatile defensive backs who are comfortable playing in all different areas, it just allows you to do so many different things. And even when they were going to that nickel and dime, I know that Auburn was in a lot of third and longs, but they could never establish the running game, and we thought that was something they were going to be able to do. So shout out to the D-line for helping in that area. I thought the linebackers represented, but to me, the key to this defense is the versatility of all those guys in the secondary, and it was kind of fitting that Jair Brown-Tig was Defensive Player of the Week in the Big Ten.
6 sacks total for the Nittany Lions defense. Some freshmen got involved in that party. Abdul Carter denied Dennis Sutton, logging those as well. We saw Zakee Wheatley, the takeaway king, come up with another moment there. And I think collectively you just start to get the sense that they're playing consistently now at 15 to 18 guys without hesitation. Now we'll see if that tightens up when you play the Ohio States and Michigans on your schedule. But to me, it's going to take a quarterback who can not only have the physical tools to get it done, but to be able to process things and then deliver in real time against the defense with a mind like Manny Diaz. I think people got so caught up on him being the head coach that they forgot about his tremendous track record as a defensive coordinator, which put him in a spot to be the head coach of the Miami Hurricanes. He's been in a bunch of different Power 5 conferences, spent time in the SEC with Mississippi State. There's not a lot he hasn't seen. And I just think when you look at the quarterbacks on Penn State's schedule, there's a stretch in October that, you raise some flags and say they're going to play some serious passers. But overall, quarterback play is not a strong suit on this schedule. And as we've seen the last couple of weeks, I think you got past that Purdue game and you're able to exhale a little bit in terms of quarterbacks you're facing for like a 5-6 week stretch. Not saying you ever want to take your foot off the gas pedal, but I think they're well positioned right now to feast on some of the quarterbacks they will face.
Definitely. The one that's most curious, I think the biggest wild card for me in terms of quarterback is what Michigan does with JJ McCarthy stepping in for Cade McNamara. We saw what Cade McNamara did last year in Happy Valley, and it was very solid. He put the ball in the right spot, and so that when Penn State did make a mistake, Michigan was there to take advantage of it. And if you look even further down the schedule, Tanner Morgan, Minnesota lost Chris Autman-Bell for the season. So that's a very, very big loss for the Minnesota offense. And yeah, I mean, I go back to the summer when I was doing those position rankings and you think, okay, quarterback, like there's going to be some good ones. It's the Big Ten. It's a Power 5 conference. Some of these teams have been recruiting at a pretty high level at the position. And then you go through it. And I think I got to that number 5 spot was very, very hard to fill in. So we'll see. I mean, you look at Maryland, Talia Tagovailoa has been pretty solid early on, and they can light up the scoreboard. So the quarterback play is not terrifying. And then that makes you feel even better about what they're able to do in the back end, because if Penn State can shut down an opposing offense with just their back 4 guys or 5 if Daquan Hardy's in there, that does a lot for that front 7 and gives Manny Diaz a lot more options.
And they got a true grown man, at the center of this in PJ Mustipher. I think you saw that. I mean, he doesn't fill the stat sheet, but I think we all saw it early in this game, his ability to just hold up the offensive line a couple of guys at a time and make life miserable for a running back who's trying to find some space. And, I think Auburn's coaching staff's under some fire for not going to those running backs early enough and often enough. But Penn State did its part to dissuade Auburn from doing that. And look, Adiza Isaac, he's coming along. PJ Mustipher back from an injury. But to me, a big part of this is some of the new faces. And Abdul Carter is really hard to ignore. Mark, you've been discussing him for some time, the preseason buzz. Daniel, you wrote off of him. I'm going to throw it to both of you. We'll start with you, Mark. What can Abdul Carter change about the way we forecast this defense's capabilities in 2022?
Well, the thing I like is that he's playing behind Curtis Jacobs, who so there's not a ton of pressure on him to be the guy right now. And he's going to be the guy at some point. I don't know if it's this year. I'm not saying he's going to pass Jacobs or if they put him in a different spot or whatever. I think James Franklin said last week that they could ultimately see him playing that Mike position, but it's a lot to put on his plate at this point. But I think being able to have him behind a guy who is playing really well. I love Jacobs. I thought he had a nice game. I think that's just a bonus for Abdul Carter to not have to rush him along. And this has been par for the course at Penn State with great linebackers and number 11s even. Way back in the day, it took, LeVar Arrington was playing behind Aaron Gatton. He could not get up. They were reluctant to really start him. Micah Parsons spent a season where he led the team in tackles, and I think he only made 1 or 2 starts. And it's just, I actually like that you do that because, number one, you're keeping the kid from, maybe blowing up his ego a little bit. Not that I think that will be an issue with Abdul Carter, but you're able to bring him along in a measured way, learning from an experienced veteran who's playing really well. And, but yeah, clearly when he gets out there, I hate to invoke the Micah Parsons, but you can see it. I mean, the guy is just running sideline to sideline, making plays, and just has a nose for the football. And then the other thing is when Jacobs got banged up, now, it's much like the quarterback position. Now they don't blink when Abdul Carter goes in there because it's like, okay, one of our best linebackers is banged up. Now we're bringing in this guy. Now this is what you have to face as the Auburn offense. I will say one other quick thing. Teams better have a really good quarterback to play this Penn State defense, because we saw what happened at Auburn. If you don't have a good quarterback, those quarterbacks were lousy throwing the ball. You better have somebody who could spin the ball a little bit or you're going to be in trouble. So sorry, Daniel. I know you had some comments on Abdul too.
I think bringing up Abdul Carter playing behind Curtis Jacobs is really good. And kind of what, like you mentioned, when Curtis Jacobs goes down, you get to turn to Abdul Carter, which from an athleticism standpoint isn't a huge drop off. And I think that applies to rotating through the game too, where if Curtis Jacobs is playing a lot of snaps, if they need to get him a breather, you put Abdul Carter in, and there's not a significant drop off from an athleticism standpoint. I think that we were concerned about the linebacker depth coming into the year, and I think the fact that Abdul Carter is as advertised as we were told he would be, I think that makes you feel a little bit better about the position. Down the road, do they move him around a little bit? I saw someone on our board said they'd like to see Jacobs and Carter out there at the same time, which I think would be a pretty good package at the second level. We'll see as they bring him along. He only got here in the summer, so he didn't have quite the head start as some of the other players, but I've just been really impressed with him so far. James Franklin has described him a couple times as a violent player. And then in his interview with Penn State's in-house media, Abdul Carter talked about that kind of being an identity of the offense or an approach that they wanted to take. So I think Manny Diaz has them in a really, really good spot in terms of being aggressive and flying around. Last week, Curtis Jacobs said that that's really what is being preached is use your instincts, be aggressive. And if you miss an assignment, if something goes wrong, there's going to be other guys there also being aggressive who can help pick you up. And I think we saw that a little bit on Saturday. And it's just been, overall, it's just been a very, very fun defense to watch so far.
And I will give some, certainly some credit over to Kobe King, Tyler Elson. A lot of our conversation at the Mike linebacker position the last couple of weeks has been, Jair Brown's playing there. That's an interesting package. I thought Kobe King, particularly, and no disrespect to Tyler Elson, I just thought he flashed a little bit more over the course of this game, probably more than he had at any point earlier in the season. The thing about this, guys, at the linebacker spot is Brandon Smith was here last year. He was a former 5-star prospect. I don't mean disrespect to him because he's off as an NFL rookie right now. But you're getting higher quality play at that position. You might be getting higher quality play at that position than from a couple guys when it's all said and done now. It's just remarkable when you factor in what Abdul Carter looks like from a comfort level and from a kind of anticipatory level versus what they've rolled out at that position. On what was a very good defense in 2021, I think that's been very surprising to me as we've kind of looked at the holes they needed to plug. This feels like it's been an improved upon spot. And we've talked a lot about what linebacker needs to grow through 3 weeks. To me, long way to go still, big test ahead. But the progress report is promising. And a big part of that is the new number 11.
Yeah. And knock on wood, a big key for this team moving forward is going to be keeping those linebackers who are playing a lot of football healthy, and I hope that's not the kiss of death, but they have enough players right now to get the job done, but knock on wood. There's one other thing I wanted to throw out there, and it just hit me when I was down on the field at the end of the game. not at linebacker, but at defensive end, when Denai Dennis Sutton had that sack. I was down on the sideline, and it was really cool. He comes off the field, and Devon Elise, Adisa Isaac, you name it, all of these veteran players coming over to hug that guy up over getting his first sack. They were as excited for him as if they would have had to sack themselves. And I know it's early in the season, and I know this team hasn't faced adversity in the terms of a loss, but the dynamic over on that defense seems to be, at this point, I just love the dynamic. Everybody seems to have everybody's back. One guy that we didn't throw out there earlier, Jalen Reed, came through and made a big play on the Zakee Wheatley pick, and the enthusiasm just among these guys. And that really, when Denai came off, and you see these veterans who that game was in the bag. These guys could have been back sitting on a bench, drinking Gatorade, getting ready to celebrate. But no, they see this guy have a sack, his first sack of his career, of what's going to be a lot of sacks, and they want to be there to welcome him back. So that was pretty cool.
Well, we've spent a lot of time on this show kind of speaking about what we've learned from Penn State, and I'm with you on the defense. There are very good vibes there. I like that guys don't seem overly concerned on who's starting football games because they know by the end of the first quarter there's going to be 18 guys involved in the field. That's a healthy thing, I think, for this defense. And before we get to our five-star mailbag, just one last hop on the hype train comment on Nick Singleton. I wrote a story about this on Sunday. Upon further review, the stats were even prettier to look at after our post-game podcast. I know I had mentioned that he had those back-to-back games with multiple 40-plus yard rushes. He went 20 years for a Penn State football fan, not seeing a single running back doing it in a single game. Nick Singleton has done it in consecutive Saturdays. Over the course of those two games, 5 40-plus yard rushes. That leads all of college football at this point of the season. And I want to note this. Take the freshman aspect aside, no Penn State running back since 2002, when Larry Johnson was embarking on his Heisman Trophy finalist campaign, has had more rushing yards through the first 3 weeks of a season than Nick Singleton currently does, 334 yards. Now, Larry Johnson had 362 yards in those first 3 games of 2002, but he needed 54 carries to get there. Nick Singleton has 334 yards on 30 carries. And just from more recent context, because I know people are saying, well, how did Barkley not do this? What about Miles Sanders? Saquon Barkley in 2017 as a junior, 38 carries to get to 307 yards. And then Miles Sanders during that All Big Ten campaign early in 2018, he had 49 carries for 295 yards. A lot of it has come on 4 or 5 different runs. And then I know people want to see kind of spread out, but this works. This is working very well. And I think in an historic context, you're starting to see exactly why Nick Singleton was being discussed ad nauseum for much of this offseason and why we were so confident he was going to come in and make that impact. Fellas, 3-0 is 3-0. What does it mean for the next 9 games? Let's get to our 5-star mailbag because we're about a month from issuing our preseason predictions. And so that's where we circle back to for this question. Let me pull it up here. Here it is. What stands out to you? I'm sorry, here it is. Actually, this one. What was your preseason prediction for Penn State's record, and have you adjusted that based on the 3-0 start? Sorry for the confusion there. I had it in front of me until I didn't.
Yeah, I'll take this. I'll go first on this one. I hate adjusting my predictions. Like for game predictions, I have to make them on Sunday because we shoot our TV show on Sunday and things may pop up. So I never really adjust, but this is a little bit different approach to an entire season. My pick was 9-3. I think as I look at it now, I would adjust it to 10-2. My thought is they beat either Michigan or Ohio State, which means they lose one of those 2 games. And then I think maybe there's a wild card loss in there at some point. And I only say that because it seems like every year under James Franklin, there's a wild card. There's at least one wild card loss. They lose a game that maybe they shouldn't lose. So I'm looking at 10-2. The depth, I don't want to say it surprised me, but I think there of all the things that have gone well for them and all the people who are playing well, I just think the overall depth of this team on both sides of the ball, the production they can get from so many different positions has really set them up to be successful for the long term. this season. So I'm looking at 10-2, and I don't know that I'm ready. I was joking earlier about the playoff. They still have to prove some things. I mean, until you prove it against Ohio State in this conference, we know. I think they match up well with Michigan, but that's going to be a tough place to play. So I'm adjusting it up to 10-2 at this point, and we'll see how it goes.
I came into the year at 8-4, and I had it with 5 games that were kind of the ones that stood out to me as the potential trip spots in Purdue, Auburn, Michigan, Ohio State, Michigan State. And my logic was that Purdue was the wild card loss, split Auburn and Michigan State, and then losses to Michigan and Ohio State. So I'm adjusting up to 10-2. Kind of similar to what Mark said in terms of what this team has shown. I think when you look around the conference, Michigan hasn't played anybody yet. So the jury is still out there. I don't think they're necessarily as good as they were last year, especially losing what they lost from those defensive ends. And then Michigan State took a pretty tough loss at Washington on Saturday night, which I think Washington might just be better than a lot of people thought coming in based on how last year went and their coaching change. So I think I want to see how Michigan State kind of rebounds, what Washington does the next couple of weeks to really get a feel out of that. But I think that with what we've seen, I mean, this looks like a 10-win team to me. You've got the 2 wins over Power 5 opponents on the road, which proves something, that shows something. And I was very wrong about the Purdue game. So I'll wear that one. And it looks like I'm going to be wrong about this season as a whole.
Well, Daniel, you were one hell of a Sean Clifford touchdown drive away from being very right about that game. So don't beat yourself up too badly. But going from 8 to 10, clearly you're trying to win back some fans after that. So you brought that 10. I'm with you. I was at 9-3, and it was important to me to note when I made my preseason prediction that I thought they would be 5-0 heading into the bye week and finish 9-3. I never bought into what Auburn was trying to sell during the preseason. Couldn't take the stink away from how they finished last year and how this offseason went for them. I'm surprised that it was a 29-point victory, that Penn State was able to go down to Jordan Hare and push the Tigers to the ground in their own playground. I didn't see that coming. So I am at this point thinking that toss-up game, I was with you. I had them losing to Ohio State, losing at Michigan, like a lot of our colleagues did, and then thinking there would be another game along the way that they would get tripped up. Because of how they came out against Ohio, actually, wasn't sloppy, wasn't a lot of sleepwalking. I thought that was a little bit different than some scenarios we've seen play out in years past in early non-conference action. And then what we saw on the road on Saturday, where all bets are kind of off on what this team could do as they continue to gel and get the younger players involved and get that confidence going. So I'm going to go to 10 wins. I'm not ready to say that they're going to get to it 11 wins and that I'm ready to push them right into Indy. But to your point, Daniel, Michigan, they're number 4 in the country. We've got to learn a lot about them and their new starting quarterback when things start to heat up for them. Ohio State's proven a lot over the years with the current players that they have. But I look at the remainder of Penn State's schedule and some of the more shakier ground games that I thought, because of the way Penn State has stabilized itself, because of the way they've attached a ground game to Sean Clifford in this backfield, and because of the way the new pieces on defense have quickly come together and shown they're ready to make an impact right now, they're further ahead of schedule. I thought they'd be a team that we come out of the year saying they took the right steps. This is a signs of progress you needed, but they still have ground to make up in the Big Ten. Right now, maybe they have ground to make up, but it may just be a team or two. Unfortunately, those two teams, they're going to have to play on their schedule. So all of a sudden, we're all pushing towards 10 guys. So you talked about the playoffs earlier. If you're flirting with 10 wins, it's going to put you in that conversation, at least for a while. So stay tuned. We got to have a lot to discuss this week. Central Michigan is coming to town, but I appreciate you guys for hopping on here after some lengthy schedule itineraries to break this one down one more time.
Yeah, great being here. As always, thanks, Lance, for the great job you do behind the scenes.
Amen. Well, Lance Glenn getting it done as our producer. We've got a lot cooking for the show this week. Plan on having a special guest. We'll reveal that when it's time. We're going to talk about Central Michigan, this matchup coming up in Beaver Stadium. We'll be back in the press conference with James Franklin tomorrow, back on the practice field Wednesday. It's all going down at Lions247.com. Don't miss out on our coverage. Tyler Calvaruzzo has a recruiting notebook up on a Monday. A lot going on right now. Appreciate everyone listening to us here on the podcast. I'm Tyler Donohue. This has been the Lions247 Podcast.